My slumlord illegally crammed 43 tenants into a 12-unit building, removed smoke detectors, and endangered my daughter. When I gathered proof, he stalked my 8-year-old and threatened to call ICE on my neighbors, not knowing I was secretly recording everything, including his fire insurance scam confession. My landlord, Vincent, had been operating an illicit subletting operation in our apartment complex for 3 years, forcing desperate tenants into perilous living situations while collecting triple the standard rent. However, I only uncovered the full scope of his activities after a fire that nearly claimed my daughter's life. It began when I observed unfamiliar individuals in the hallways at unusual hours. People I'd never encountered before were carrying mattresses up the rear stairwell. At 2 a.m., multiple households were preparing meals in a shared kitchen, which was intended for only 6 units. Vincent consistently offered excuses about temporary visitors or maintenance personnel staying overnight. The structure was designed to accommodate 12 residents across 6 apartments. Yet, I began counting and realized there were at least 40 people residing there. Some were in windowless basement storage areas. Others in the unlawfully converted attic where Vincent had run extension cords and garden hoses for makeshift utilities. I attempted to contact the city authorities, but Vincent's sibling held a position in the housing department, and my grievances mysteriously disappeared. Simultaneously, Vincent started making my life unbearable with fabricated lease violations, cutting off my hot water for repairs that never occurred, and informing other occupants that I was an informant seeking their eviction. Matters intensified when I discovered families with children occupying what was formerly the boiler room. No windows, no proper ventilation, just a space heater connected to a series of power strips. When I confronted Vincent, he smirked and stated that if I continued to cause trouble, he would evict me based on the fabricated lease violations he had been documenting. He presented photographs he had taken of my residence during inspections when I was absent. Items moved to suggest unauthorized pets, wall damage he himself had inflicted, even planted drug paraphernalia that he had photographed and then removed, constructing a case that would ruin my reputation and make it impossible to secure housing elsewhere. I began recording everything with concealed cameras, documenting the foot traffic, the unauthorized construction, the cash payments that never generated receipts, and most damningly, a conversation where Vincent boasted to another property owner about his infallible method for maximizing profits from vulnerable immigrants who could not voice complaints. The turning point arrived at 3 a.m. when smoke filled our corridor because one of those chain power strips in the basement had ignited. As I rushed through the building pounding on doors, I realized Vincent had taken out the smoke detectors to create more illegal rooms, and the fire exits were obstructed by beds and furniture. My daughter was coughing so severely she struggled to breathe as we evacuated 43 individuals from a building certified for 12. Including an elderly couple trapped in a windowless space who would have perished if another tenant hadn't forced open their door. Meanwhile, Vincent appeared and attempted to prevent anyone from contacting emergency services. The fire department immediately condemned the building, but Vincent had the audacity to demand we all continue paying rent for our supposed negligence in causing the fire, threatening to sue us and report undocumented residents to immigration authorities if anyone cooperated with investigators. That's when I revealed months of accumulated evidence to the district attorney. It wasn't just about our building, but the 7 other properties Vincent owned, all operating the same scheme, generating over $400,000 annually in illicit rent while maintaining the properties in lethal conditions. The raids on his properties occurred simultaneously across the city, uncovering over 300 people living in circumstances that violated every conceivable housing regulation, including one building where he had converted an old walk-in freezer into a studio apartment without heat or windows. Vincent was apprehended on charges ranging from racketeering to endangerment. But at his bail hearing, he continued to smile at me, and his legal representative mentioned concerns about the authenticity of certain evidence, stating they would investigate how I had acquired my recordings. 2 weeks later, I returned home to find my apartment door slightly ajar and my computer missing, along with all my backup drives. However, I had anticipated this and had copies stored in 3 distinct locations, including one with a journalist who was preparing an expose on citywide housing corruption. The trial was scheduled to commence next month, but Vincent's sibling in the housing department had been promoted to supervise inspection reforms. And 3 witnesses had suddenly decided to relocate to their native countries after receiving visits from men inquiring about their immigration status. Last night, I received a text message from an unknown number with a photograph of my daughter's school and the message, "Nice building. Shame if something happened to it." When I attempted to trace the number, it led back to a company called VR Property Solutions, which does not appear on any official registry, but somehow had just acquired the building adjacent to my daughter's school for renovation. And I believe I know precisely what kind of renovations they intend. I stared at my phone, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the images Vincent's associates had sent. Not just my daughter's school, but pictures of her walking to class, eating lunch with companions, even one captured through the classroom window during math. My stomach churned as I realized they had been observing her for days, documenting her routine, learning her schedule. I forwarded everything to the journalist and my attorney, then contacted the school to alert them about suspicious individuals. But the secretary dismissed my concerns, explaining that construction crews had been surveying the area all week for the new building renovation. The renovation by VR Property Solutions, Vincent's fandom company, was preparing to transform another building into a death trap, right beside where my daughter spent 8 hours a day. I drove to the school immediately, circling the block to inspect the property myself. Indeed, permits were posted for residential conversion, and men in hard hats were measuring doorways, marking walls, performing calculations that I knew meant they were determining how many desperate individuals they could pack into each room. One of them seemed familiar, and when he turned, I recognized him from Vincent's other properties. The same foreman who had installed those illegal basement units where the elderly couple had nearly died. I parked across the street and began taking photographs, documenting the workers, the permit numbers, the company vehicles with magnetic signs that could be easily removed. Through my camera lens, I watched them unload the same inexpensive materials Vincent always used, the thin drywall that would not muffle sound, the substandard wiring that would overload within months, the narrow doors that would trap people if another fire erupted. My phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number displaying a picture of me sitting in my car at that exact moment, taken from somewhere behind me. The message read, "Still watching, still documenting, just like you." My hands shook as I started the engine and drove away, constantly checking my mirrors for anyone following. At a red light, I noticed a van 2 cars behind that had been trailing me since the school. So, I executed 4 consecutive right turns, and predictably, the van remained with me through the pointless circuit. Instead of heading home, I drove to the police station and parked directly in front, observing as the van slowed, hesitated, then proceeded past. I spent an hour inside filing a report about the stalking and surveillance, but the desk sergeant seemed more interested in whether I had any history of mental health issues or prior conflicts with neighbors than in the evidence I was presenting. Back home, I found my mailbox filled with official-looking documents, eviction notices citing lease violations I had never committed, photographs of supposed damage to my apartment that had been digitally altered, even a letter from a law firm threatening to sue me for defamation and tortious interference with business relations. The final blow was a notice from Child Protective Services stating they had received an anonymous report about unsafe living conditions and would be conducting a home visit within 72 hours. Vincent was no longer merely attempting to silence me. He was systematically dismantling my life using every bureaucratic weapon at his disposal. I contacted my attorney, but his secretary said he was in court. I called the journalist, but reached voicemail. I telephoned 3 other lawyers, but they all stated they could not accept a case against Vincent, muttering about conflicts of interest or full caseloads. The isolation was deliberate. I realized Vincent and his sibling had connections everywhere, favors owed, palms greased, a network of corruption that made fighting back feel like punching smoke. But I still possessed the evidence, and more importantly, I had the other tenants who had survived that night, witnesses who had seen everything firsthand. I began making calls to the families who had escaped the fire, but the first 3 numbers were disconnected. The 4th person answered, but immediately hung up when I spoke my name. The 5th, a young mother named Maria who had been living in the basement with her 2 children, whispered that men had visited her new apartment asking questions, implying that her immigration status might be reviewed if she testified. She was terrified, and I could not blame her. Vincent was not just threatening legal action. He was weaponizing people's fears, their vulnerability, their desperate need to remain in this country and keep their families together. That evening, I sat with my daughter doing homework, striving to appear normal while my mind raced through contingencies. She could sense something was amiss, repeatedly asking why I was checking the windows, why I had installed new locks, why her uncle was suddenly picking her up from school instead of allowing her to walk home with friends. I invented excuses about being extra cautious, but children are not foolish. There's something remarkably convenient about how Vincent's brother happens to work in the housing department where complaints vanish. It makes me wonder how long this arrangement has been protecting him while 43 people resided in a building intended for 12. She knew we were in danger, even if she did not fully comprehend the extent of Vincent's capabilities. The next morning, I awoke to find my car tires slashed and a note beneath the windshield. Next time, it won't be the tires. I contacted the police again, but they stated that without video evidence, they could not prove who was responsible. The security camera on our building that would have captured the vandalism had mysteriously malfunctioned overnight, the footage corrupted beyond recovery. I was beginning to grasp how Vincent had operated for so long without repercussions. It was not merely corruption. It was a systematic approach to intimidation that remained just within the bounds of plausible deniability. I replaced the tires and drove to meet the journalist at a coffee shop downtown, constantly checking for surveillance. She had been investigating Vincent's background and discovered his network extended beyond housing. He had connections to construction companies that cut corners, inspection services that ignored violations, even a cousin who worked in immigration enforcement. The web of corruption was vast, but also fragile, she explained. If we could expose one thread, the entire structure might unravel. But we needed more than my evidence. We needed an insider to cooperate. That's when I recalled Carlos, the maintenance worker at Vincent's properties who had assisted in evacuating people during the fire. He had seemed conflicted that night, torn between his employment and his conscience as he watched families stumble out of smoke-filled rooms. I had seen him arguing with Vincent afterward, gesturing at the blocked exits and disabled smoke detectors. If anyone might be willing to speak, it would be him. But locating Carlos would mean returning to Vincent's properties, walking directly into the lion's den. I spent the afternoon preparing, uploading all my evidence to multiple cloud services, sending encrypted copies to contacts in other cities, even mailing a USB drive to my sister in another state with instructions to release everything if something happened to me. Perhaps paranoid, but I had learned that Vincent's influence was more far-reaching than I had imagined, and I required insurance beyond what any official system could provide. The journalist provided me with a small recording device disguised as a pen, and we agreed on a check-in schedule. If I missed a call, she would assume the worst and publish everything. That night, I drove past 3 of Vincent's buildings searching for Carlos's truck. At the 4th property, I spotted it parked outside, and through the lobby window, I could see him replacing a light fixture. I waited until he emerged for a smoke break, then approached cautiously, ensuring we were alone. His face paled when he saw me, and he immediately began walking away, but I called out that I just wanted to talk, that I knew he had tried to do the right thing during the fire. He stopped but did not turn around, his shoulders tense as he said Vincent had eyes everywhere, that speaking to me was perilous. I informed him about the school near my daughter's, about VR Property Solutions, about how Vincent was planning to expand his operation. Carlos's hands clenched into fists as he murmured that he had seen the blueprints, dozens more illegal units, families with children crammed into spaces without proper exits. He had a daughter, too, he said, and the thought of children perishing due to greed made him ill. But Vincent paid well, and employment was scarce with his background. I inquired about his record, and Carlos admitted he had served time for a youthful error, nothing violent, but enough to make employers apprehensive. Vincent hired ex-convicts because he knew they would be grateful and silent, less likely to complain about what they observed. But the fire had altered things. Carlos could no longer sleep, constantly recalling the elderly couple's faces, continually imagining his own daughter trapped in a room with no windows. He desired to leave, but did not know how to depart without Vincent making his life miserable. We conversed for 20 minutes in the shadows between buildings, Carlos chain-smoking as he detailed the extent of Vincent's operation, the cash payments, the off-the-books contractors, the way Vincent would target recent immigrants who were unaware of their rights. He informed me about a storage unit where Vincent kept duplicate ledgers, the true records of his income, not the sanitized versions he presented to tax authorities. Carlos possessed a key, having been asked to retrieve files from there previously. If we could obtain those records, we would have proof of tax evasion in addition to everything else. Before we separated, Carlos agreed to consider cooperating, but he required guarantees, protection for his family, assistance in finding new employment, assurance that he would not face charges for his minor involvement in Vincent's schemes. I promised to speak to the district attorney to ascertain what kind of arrangement might be feasible. As I walked back to my car, I felt a mix of hope and apprehension. We were constructing a case, but Vincent was also escalating, and I worried about what he might do when cornered. The home visit from Child Protective Services was scheduled for the next morning, and I spent the night meticulously cleaning, organizing documents that demonstrated I was a capable parent, attempting to anticipate what false accusations Vincent might have made. My daughter assisted, confused but cooperative, tidying her room and homework to show she was well cared for. The irony was not lost on me that Vincent, who had endangered dozens of children with his avarice, was now attempting to use child welfare services as a weapon against me. When the social worker arrived, she seemed surprised by the normal, clean apartment and the healthy, well-adjusted child who answered her questions politely. She proceeded through her checklist professionally, but I could see her confusion mounting. Finally, she admitted the complaint had been unusually specific, alleging I was operating a substance laboratory in my kitchen and conducting ritual abuse. Allegations so preposterous they seemed designed to be dismissed. She apologized for the intrusion and stated she would be closing the case as unfounded, but I requested her to document everything, especially the origin of the complaint. After she departed, I discovered another note slipped under my door, a warning. Stop now, or the next visit won't be so pleasant. The threat was unambiguous. Vincent could weaponize any system, make any accusation, force me to defend myself against falsehoods while he continued to operate with impunity. But he had erred with the CPS complaint. It was so patently false, so maliciously fabricated, that it would help prove his pattern of harassment. When we finally reached court, every attack he made was becoming evidence against him. I collected the evidence from the CPS visit and added it to my expanding collection. The social worker's report would be vital in demonstrating Vincent's harassment pattern. My daughter went to her room to complete homework while I considered my options. The isolation tactics were effective. Vincent had successfully cut me off from legal assistance and frightened away witnesses, but there had to be another solution. My phone rang with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Heavy breathing filled the line before a raspy voice warned me to check my daughter's backpack. I rushed to her room and discovered a small tracking device sewn into the lining, along with photographs of her at various locations throughout the past week. My hands trembled as I removed the device and crushed it under my heel. They had been monitoring her every movement, constructing a detailed map of her daily routine. I decided to alter my strategy. If Vincent wished to play dirty, I would have to become inventive. I contacted my brother-in-law, who worked in private security, and asked him to sweep my apartment for bugs. He arrived within an hour with electronic detection equipment. We located 3 listening devices, one in the kitchen, one in my bedroom, and one in the living room. He demonstrated how to disable them subtly, leaving them in place but feeding them dead air. While he worked, I explained the situation. He offered to help safeguard my daughter, suggesting we vary her routes to school and have different family members pick her up each day. We devised a schedule that would make it more difficult for Vincent's people to anticipate her movements. He also gave me a panic button that would alert him instantly if we were in danger. That night, I received another text with a photograph of my elderly mother entering her apartment building across town. The message was unequivocal. Vincent could reach anyone I cared about. I telephoned my mother immediately, instructing her to pack a bag and stay with my aunt for a few days. She protested, but agreed when she detected the fear in my voice. I could not sleep, so I spent the night organizing my evidence into multiple categories: building code violations, financial deception, witness intimidation, and now stalking and harassment. Each folder was meticulously labeled and cross-referenced. I created a timeline illustrating how Vincent's operation had evolved and expanded over the years. The pattern was evident. He targeted vulnerable communities, used fear to maintain control, and had his sibling conceal any complaints. In the morning, I drove my daughter to school myself, taking a different route and watching for any vehicles following us. At the school, I spoke with the principal about the security concerns, showing her the photographs Vincent's people had taken. She was alarmed and promised to increase supervision during recess and dismissal. I also provided her with a photo of Vincent and his known associates to share with the security staff. On my way back, I noticed the same van from yesterday parked near my building. Instead of going home, I drove to a bustling shopping center and parked in the underground garage. I waited 20 minutes, then slipped out through a service entrance and took public transportation to Carlos's neighborhood. I needed to persuade him to assist before Vincent silenced him, too. Vincent was playing chess while everyone else was stuck on checkers, tracking devices in backpacks, bugs in apartments, even corrupted security footage. This individual was orchestrating an entire spy movie operation merely to protect his slum empire from one determined mother with a smartphone. I found Carlos at a local diner, hunched over coffee and appearing exhausted. He flinched when I sat down, but did not leave. I showed him the photographs of my daughter and explained how Vincent was escalating. Carlos's jaw tightened as he looked at the images. He had a daughter the same age, he reminded me, and the thought of someone stalking her enraged him. Carlos finally consented to help, but on his terms. He would provide information about the storage unit and Vincent's operations, but he would not testify in court. He was too afraid of deportation and losing custody of his daughter. I accepted his conditions, grateful for any assistance. He drew me a map to the storage facility and provided the unit number, warning that Vincent inspected it regularly. We arranged to meet again in 2 days. Carlos would attempt to discover Vincent's schedule for visiting the storage unit. In the interim, he would document any illegal activities he witnessed at the properties. I gave him a burner phone to contact me safely and emphasized the importance of being cautious. Vincent had eyes everywhere, and we could not afford to alert him. Back at my apartment, I found my door slightly ajar again. This time, nothing was missing, but everything had been subtly rearranged. Pictures were askew, furniture shifted a few inches, drawers left partially open. It was psychological warfare designed to make me feel violated and insecure in my own home. I photographed everything before tidying up, adding it to my harassment file. The journalist called with an update. She had been investigating Vincent's sibling in the housing department and discovered a pattern of complaints disappearing whenever they involved Vincent's properties. She had also found 3 other landlords operating similar schemes, all connected to Vincent's network. The story was more extensive than we had realized, but she required more concrete evidence before her editor would approve publication. I spent the afternoon reaching out to tenant advocacy groups, hoping to find others who had dealt with Vincent. Most were reluctant to get involved, but one organizer named Navy mentioned knowing several families who had been displaced by Vincent's operations. She agreed to connect me with them if they were willing to speak. Every witness we could locate strengthened our case. My daughter returned home from school upset. Some children had been asking her peculiar questions about where we lived and whether we were relocating soon. The questions seemed innocent enough, but the timing was suspicious. I reassured her while making a mental note to investigate who these children's parents were. Vincent's influence within the school community was deeper than I had imagined. That evening, we had dinner at my sister's house for safety. While the children played, I updated her on the situation. She was horrified by the escalation and offered to let us stay with her, but I knew that would only make us easier targets. We needed to maintain our routines while remaining vigilant. She agreed to be part of the school pickup rotation and to check on our apartment when we were not there. On the drive home, I noticed we were being followed again. This time, it was a sedan, keeping 3 cars back, but matching our turns. I contacted my brother-in-law and described the vehicle. He advised me to drive to the nearest police station again, but I had a different idea. I drove to the busiest part of downtown, where traffic cameras covered every intersection. If Vincent's people wanted to follow me, they would be recorded doing it. The sedan eventually departed, but I spent another hour driving aimlessly before heading home. My daughter had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the stress of recent days. I carried her inside, double-checking the locks and propping a chair against the door as an additional alarm. The psychological toll was accumulating, but I could not allow Vincent to win through intimidation. Late that night, Carlos texted from the burner phone. Vincent would be at the storage facility tomorrow afternoon, retrieving files for his lawyer. It was risky, but if I could arrive first, I might be able to photograph the evidence before he removed it. I spent hours planning the approach, considering every possible complication. One error could jeopardize everything. I awoke before dawn and prepared meticulously. I dressed in inconspicuous clothing and a baseball cap, taking public transportation to avoid being followed. The storage facility was in an industrial area surrounded by warehouses and auto shops. I arrived 2 hours before Vincent's anticipated visit, allowing myself time to scout the location and plan escape routes. The facility had minimal security, just a keypad entry and some cameras at the main entrance. I observed other customers coming and going, noting the blind spots in camera coverage. Carlos's key functioned perfectly, and I slipped inside, locating Unit 47B in the back corner. My hands trembled as I opened the lock, knowing I was crossing a boundary that Vincent would never forgive. Inside, boxes of documents lined the walls, financial records, lease agreements, correspondence with contractors, all the evidence of Vincent's illicit empire. I photographed everything systematically, ensuring each image was clear and legible. There were receipts for cash payments, contracts with shell companies, even a ledger showing the actual occupancy of each building versus what was reported to the city. I found a folder marked insurance that sent chills down my spine. Vincent had been taking out policies on his properties with inflated values, positioning himself to profit if any of them burned down. The implications were terrifying. Had the fire in our building been more than just an accident? I photographed every page, my mind racing with the possibilities. A sound outside made me freeze. Footsteps were approaching, and I could hear voices. I quickly closed the boxes and moved to the back of the unit, concealing myself behind a stack of furniture. The footsteps passed by, just other customers accessing their units, but my heart was pounding. I waited 5 minutes before emerging, ensuring the coast was clear. I had just relocked the unit when my phone vibrated. Carlos was warning me that Vincent had departed early and was already en route. I had perhaps 10 minutes before he arrived. I walked quickly but calmly toward the exit, keeping my head down. As I reached the main gate, a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. Vincent was here. I ducked behind a dumpster, watching as Vincent and two other men exited the car. They were conversing animatedly, and Vincent appeared agitated. He kept checking his phone and scanning the area. Had someone alerted him? I waited until they entered the building, then sprinted to the nearest bus stop, not pausing until I was miles away. Back home, I immediately uploaded all the photographs to multiple cloud services and sent copies to the journalist. The evidence was damning, revealing years of systematic fraud and endangerment, but I knew Vincent would realize someone had been in his storage unit. The question was whether he would suspect me or Carlos. Either way, matters were about to escalate dramatically. Indeed, within hours, I received a call from Carlos. Vincent was furious, interrogating all his employees about who might have accessed the storage unit. Carlos was feigning ignorance, but Vincent's paranoia was spiraling. He had already changed the locks and was relocating the documents to a new place. We had obtained the evidence just in time. The journalist called, excited by what I had sent. Her editor had approved the story, but they required a few days to verify everything and consult with their legal team. She cautioned me to be extra careful in the interim. Once the story broke, Vincent would know precisely who was behind it. I needed to be prepared for his retaliation. I spent the evening making contingency plans. I arranged for my daughter to stay with different relatives each night, never sleeping in the same place twice. I packed emergency bags with clothing, cash, and copies of important documents. I even researched hotels in neighboring towns in case we needed to vanish for a few days. My phone rang with another unknown number. This time, it was a woman's voice, soft and hesitant. She introduced herself as Alexander, Vincent's former bookkeeper. She had heard I was gathering evidence against him and wished to help. She possessed records spanning 5 years, detailing the full extent of his financial misdeeds, but she was terrified of meeting in person. We arranged to communicate through encrypted messages. Alexander sent me spreadsheets illustrating Vincent's true income versus what he reported to the IRS. The tax evasion alone amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars. She also had emails between Vincent and his sibling explicitly discussing how to suppress complaints and falsify inspection reports. It was the crucial evidence we needed. The next morning brought a new threat. A letter arrived from Vincent's lawyer, not just threatening to sue, but claiming they had evidence I had committed burglary and corporate espionage. They were demanding I cease all defamatory activities and return any stolen documents immediately. The letter was carefully phrased to sound legitimate while being vague about what exactly they believed I had done. I forwarded the letter to the journalist's legal team and attempted to find an attorney of my own. After a dozen calls, I finally found one willing to take the case pro bono. She was a young lawyer named Victoria who specialized in tenant rights. She had been following Vincent's case and was eager to help bring him down. We met at her office to strategize. Victoria reviewed all my evidence and was impressed by my thoroughness. She explained that Vincent's threats were mostly bravado designed to intimidate me into retreating. The key was to remain on the offensive, not allowing him to control the narrative. She began preparing a countersuit for harassment and defamation, turning Vincent's own tactics against him. Vincent's timing at the storage unit feels suspiciously precise for someone who was supposedly arriving later. It makes me wonder if Carlos was playing both sides this entire time. The way everything aligned so perfectly with those documents just sitting there, then Vincent appearing exactly when she was leaving. Something doesn't quite add up here. Meanwhile, the situation at my daughter's school was worsening. The construction next door had accelerated, with crews working late into the night. The noise was disrupting classes, and parents were beginning to complain. I attended a school board meeting where several parents voiced concerns about the renovation, but the board claimed their hands were tied since all the permits were in order. After the meeting, I was approached by another parent who whispered that she had overheard the construction foreman discussing the installation of efficiency units in the building. She did not know what that meant, but I did. Vincent was planning to create another death trap right next to an elementary school. The thought of children playing yards away from another potential fire hazard made me physically ill. I shared this information with Nathy from the tenant advocacy group. She mobilized her network to investigate the construction site, documenting any safety violations or suspicious activities. Within days, they had found multiple issues: improper electrical work, inadequate fire exits, and modifications that did not match the approved permits. We had Vincent violating building codes in real time. The pressure was mounting from all directions. Carlos reported that Vincent had hired new security for all his properties, making it harder for tenants to come and go freely. Some families were essentially trapped, afraid to leave in case they could not re-enter. The humanitarian crisis was intensifying, but Vincent did not care as long as the rent continued to flow. Then came the breakthrough we had been anticipating. One of Vincent's other properties experienced a minor fire, just a kitchen accident, but it required fire department response. When they arrived, they discovered conditions similar to our building: overcrowding, blocked exits, and disabled smoke detectors. This time, they could not disregard it. The building was evacuated and condemned on the spot. The media picked up the story, and suddenly Vincent's empire was under scrutiny. Other tenants began coming forward, emboldened by the attention. The journalist's story was still days away from publication, but the groundwork was being laid. Public opinion was turning against Vincent, and his political connections were starting to distance themselves. Vincent's response was swift and brutal. I awoke to find my car vandalized again, this time with paint stripper poured over the hood. My tires were not just slashed, but completely shredded. A note was tucked under what remained of the windshield wiper. Last warning. But I was past the point of being intimidated. Every assault just added to the evidence against him. Victoria filed an emergency restraining order, citing the escalating harassment and threats against my daughter. The judge granted it, ordering Vincent to stay away from us and cease all contact. It was a minor victory, but I knew a piece of paper would not stop someone as desperate as Vincent. Still, it was now officially recorded that he was dangerous. The journalist called with final questions before the story went to print. She had corroborated everything with multiple sources and had statements from dozens of affected tenants. The story would run in 2 days, exposing not just Vincent, but the entire network of corruption that enabled him. She warned me to be ready for the fallout and to have a safe place to stay when it hit. I spent those 2 days in a state of hypervigilance. My daughter stayed with my parents out of state, missing school, but safe from Vincent's reach. I moved between friends' houses, never staying in one place too long. Carlos checked in regularly, reporting that Vincent was growing increasingly erratic, lashing out at employees and tenants alike. The night before the story was set to publish, I received one last call from Vincent himself. His voice was calm, almost resigned, as he made one final offer. He would drop all legal threats, leave me and my family alone, even pay for our relocation if I would just convince the journalist to cancel the story. The desperation beneath his composure was palpable. He knew his empire was crumbling. I recorded the call, adding it to my evidence collection. His offer was an admission of guilt, an acknowledgement that everything I had documented was true. I told him it was too late, that too many people knew the truth now. He could not intimidate or buy his way out of this one. The silence on the other end stretched for long seconds before he hung up without another word. That night, I barely slept, knowing that everything was about to change. The story would expose Vincent's crimes to the world, but it would also make me a target for anyone still loyal to him. I had won this battle, but the war was far from over. As dawn broke, I checked the news website obsessively, waiting for the story to appear. The morning the story went live, I was already at the district attorney's office with Victoria, presenting our complete evidence package. The prosecutor examined each document carefully, cross-referencing the financial records with the building violations. Vincent's insurance policies caught her attention immediately. She made several phone calls, and within an hour, investigators were dispatched to all of Vincent's properties simultaneously. I watched from across the street as police cars surrounded the building next to my daughter's school. The construction crews scattered, some attempting to conceal evidence of the illegal modifications they had been making. Officers emerged carrying boxes of documents and computer equipment. Vincent arrived 20 minutes later, his face paling when he saw the scene. He tried to leave, but found his path blocked by detectives who had warrants for his arrest. The journalist's story had gone viral within hours, picked up by local news outlets, and shared thousands of times on social media. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from former tenants who had suffered under Vincent's schemes. Many wished to share their own stories to add their voices to the growing chorus demanding justice. I forwarded their contacts to Victoria, who was building a comprehensive case. That afternoon, Carlos called from a payphone. Vincent's arrest had created chaos at the properties. The security guards had abandoned their posts, and tenants were finally free to come and go. But many had nowhere else to go, trapped by poverty and immigration status. Carlos was helping organize temporary shelters through local churches while the city scrambled to address the humanitarian crisis Vincent had created. I picked up my daughter from my parents' house, explaining that the immediate danger had passed. She hugged me tightly, relieved to be returning home. On the drive back, we passed one of Vincent's buildings where families were loading their belongings into trucks, finally free to leave the dangerous conditions they had endured for so long. My daughter watched quietly, understanding more than I had given her credit for. Back at our apartment, I found a notice from the building's management company. With Vincent in custody, they were conducting emergency inspections of all units. The illegal modifications would be removed, the building brought up to code. They estimated 3 months of construction, during which they would provide temporary housing for all legitimate tenants. It was not perfect, but it was progress. Victoria called with updates from the arraignment. Vincent had been charged with 47 counts, including racketeering, endangerment, tax evasion, and witness intimidation. His sibling at the housing department had been suspended pending investigation. The judge set bail at $2 million, which Vincent could not meet without liquidating properties that were now under scrutiny. He would remain in custody until trial. The next few days blurred together in a whirlwind of legal proceedings and media attention. I gave statements to investigators, provided testimony to the grand jury, and worked with Victoria to ensure all our evidence was properly documented. Other tenants began coming forward, no longer afraid of deportation or retaliation. Maria, the young mother from the basement, testified about the conditions her children had endured. Alexander, Vincent's former bookkeeper, finally agreed to meet in person at Victoria's office. She brought additional evidence showing Vincent had been planning to expand his operation to other cities, using the profits from his current properties to fund more dangerous conversions. She had quit when she realized the scope of his plans, but had kept copies of everything, knowing someday someone would need proof. The fire department's investigation revealed that the electrical fire in our building had not been accidental. The wiring had been so overloaded that failure was inevitable. It was only fortune that it had not been worse, that no one had died. The insurance policies Vincent had taken out suddenly looked less like business planning and more like premeditation. Additional charges were filed. Carlos found legitimate employment with a property management company that valued his honesty about Vincent's operations. He became a key witness, explaining the inner workings of the scheme to prosecutors. His testimony about the storage unit and Vincent's actual books proved crucial in establishing the financial crimes. The district attorney's office helped him secure legal residency in exchange for his cooperation. 3 weeks after Vincent's arrest, I attended a community meeting at my daughter's school. Parents packed the auditorium, demanding answers about how the construction next door had been approved. The school board announced they were reviewing all nearby development applications and implementing new safety protocols. The building Vincent had purchased would be converted to affordable housing under strict oversight. Vincent's properties were placed under emergency management while the courts settled ownership. The city established a task force to inspect every unit and relocate tenants to safe housing. Vincent's criminal empire collapsing faster than his shoddy construction work is quite the spectacle. 47 charges means he'll need a storage unit just for his legal paperwork. It was a monumental undertaking, but public pressure demanded action. News crews documented the conditions people had lived in, making it impossible for officials to ignore it any longer. My daughter returned to school with newfound confidence, no longer looking over her shoulder. Her teachers reported she was more engaged, more willing to participate. The constant stress of recent months had affected her more than I had realized. We began seeing a family counselor to process everything that had occurred, to rebuild our sense of security. Victoria filed civil lawsuits on behalf of the tenants, seeking damages for the dangerous conditions they had endured. Vincent's assets were frozen, his properties likely to be sold to compensate victims. It would not undo the trauma, but it would provide some measure of justice. Many families would finally have the resources to start over in safe homes. The criminal trial was set for 6 months out, giving prosecutors time to build their case. Vincent's lawyer attempted various motions to dismiss, claiming evidence had been obtained illegally, but the judge rejected each one. The sheer volume of documentation, witness testimony, and physical evidence made Vincent's guilt undeniable. His empire had completely crumbled. I returned to work, attempting to establish normal routines. Colleagues who had followed the news treated me differently, some with admiration, others with weariness. Whistleblowers made people uncomfortable even when they had done the right thing. I focused on my job and my daughter, allowing Victoria to handle the ongoing legal matters. Vincent's sibling was indicted on corruption charges after investigators found years of suppressed complaints and falsified reports. The housing department underwent a complete restructuring with new oversight measures to prevent similar abuse. It was a small victory in a system that had failed so many people for so long. One evening, while helping my daughter with homework, she inquired if we were truly safe now. I told her that Vincent could no longer harm us, that the law had finally caught up with him. She nodded, then asked about all the other families who had lived in those dangerous buildings. I explained that people were working to assist them, that changes were being made. She seemed content, returning to her math problems with renewed focus. The journalist won an award for her investigative reporting, bringing national attention to the issue of predatory landlords. She interviewed me for a follow-up piece about the importance of documenting evidence and resisting intimidation. I agreed on the condition that the focus remain on the systemic problems, not on portraying me as some kind of hero. As the trial date approached, Vincent attempted one last manipulation. Through his lawyer, he offered to plead guilty to lesser charges if I would agree not to testify. The desperation was obvious. My testimony would be devastating. I refused immediately. After everything he had put us through, he deserved to face the full consequences of his actions. The night before the trial, I could not sleep. I reviewed my testimony one more time, ensuring every detail was clear. My daughter made me a good luck card with a drawing of our apartment building, but this time with proper exits and working smoke detectors. Children noticed everything, processing trauma in their own ways. On the first day of trial, the courthouse was packed with former tenants, advocates, and media. Vincent sat at the defense table, no longer the confident predator who had terrorized so many families. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without the power he had wielded so cruelly. When our eyes met, I felt no satisfaction, just relief that this chapter was concluding. My testimony lasted 3 hours. I presented the evidence methodically, guiding the jury through Vincent's schemes, the dangerous conditions, the intimidation tactics. The prosecutor displayed photographs of the overcrowded rooms, the blocked exits, the disabled smoke detectors. Several jurors appeared visibly shaken by what they observed. Other witnesses followed, each contributing their piece to the puzzle. Maria described raising her children in a windowless basement. Carlos explained the cash payments and doctored books. Alexander detailed the financial deception. The elderly couple who had nearly died in the fire gave devastating testimony about being trapped in their room. Vincent's defense attorney could barely make a dent in the mountain of evidence. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts. Vincent showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but his hands trembled slightly. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month, thanking the jury for their service. As court adjourned, former tenants embraced in the hallway, finally witnessing justice served. At sentencing, victim impact statements filled an entire morning. Families described the fear, the degradation, the constant threat of eviction or deportation. Children spoke about nightmares of fires, of being trapped. The judge listened intently, occasionally removing his glasses to wipe his eyes. When Vincent was offered the opportunity to speak, he remained silent. The sentence was severe but just: 25 years in prison, millions in restitution, lifetime prohibition from property management. Vincent would spend decades behind bars, unable to exploit vulnerable families ever again. As guards led him away, I felt a burden lift from my shoulders. We had won. My daughter was safe. The buildings would be repaired. In the weeks that followed, I assisted other tenants in navigating the restitution process, sharing what I had learned about documentation and legal procedures. A nonprofit organization formed to aid families affected by predatory landlords, using our case as a model. Real change was happening. Slowly but surely, my daughter and I relocated to a new apartment in a building with proper safety measures and honest management. She decorated her room with bright colors, finally feeling secure enough to truly make it her own. We established new routines, new traditions, free from the constant fear that had defined our lives for so long. Looking back, I sometimes wondered if I would undertake it all again, knowing the cost. Then I would remember the elderly couple trapped in that windowless room, the families crammed into fire traps, the children whose lives were at risk. There had been no alternative. Someone had to stop Vincent, and circumstances had made that someone me. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Maria. She had found stable housing, and her children were thriving in their new school. She thanked me for standing up when others were too afraid, for giving her family a chance at a better life. I kept that letter, a reminder that ordinary people could make a difference when they refused to be silenced. Life returned to normalcy, or as normal as it could be after such an experience. My daughter excelled in school, no longer burdened by constant fear. I advanced at work, my reputation for integrity actually benefiting my career. We built a good life, a safe life, exactly what every family deserved. The buildings Vincent had owned were renovated properly, transformed into affordable housing with strict oversight. Families moved in, finally having homes that met basic safety standards. The illegal units were removed, proper exits installed, smoke detectors that actually functioned. It was what should have existed all along. There's something truly intriguing about how Vincent remains silent when given the chance to speak at sentencing. It makes me wonder if he finally understands what he did, or if he has simply given up on attempting to manipulate people. 25 years seems like a substantial sentence, But then again, the way all those families describe their fear and the children discussing nightmares of being trapped, that's quite profound.